To the Point with Michael Williams.
His plan for health insurance for the needy had the approval of Republicans and Democrats in the Florida Senate, but did not get through the House. His plan for limiting drones did pass, winning unanimous approval in the Florida legislature. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. A local legislator back home now, earning a lot of attention for his work in the state legislature this year, and he is our guest. He's Republican Senator from Stewart, Joe Negron. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you,
Michael.
Michael.
It's been a busy 60 days for you. You head the Senate Appropriations Committee. We want to talk about not only your future, perhaps Senate presidency in line in a few years. We'll get to that, and your political future. But talking the issues first, health care. 1.1 million Floridians. There was a chance. The governor said he'd accept federal money. He did an about-face on the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, as some have described it, said we'll accept the money. We need that for 1.1 million Floridians who need insurance. You pushed hard in the Senate. You felt you had a deal, didn't get through the House. That's the headlines. Fill in the details of what happened, where we are, where we go.
Well, the first issue was whether or not we wanted to expand Medicaid or not.
Right.
And both the House and Senate felt like setting up more people in an entitlement program wasn't the way to go. So what I looked at and said, what can we do for about 1 million Floridians that get up and go to work every day, but they don't earn enough money to pay for all of their health insurance costs. So we wanted to use federal funds and some state revenue as well to help people get an insurance card, but they had to do their part. So they would have to pay co-pays and deductibles and assist to the extent that they were able to. But Michael, I'd much rather have people show up at the emergency room with a health insurance card that they own, rather than what happens now, which is people still need health care. They still have emergencies, so they use our emergency rooms as their primary care, and it ends up getting passed along to the rest of us. So I thought this was a way to empower people, but still live within our means. We weren't able to get the House to agree, so we'll have to take a shot at it next year.
Why, in your estimation, weren't you able to? It seemed to so many, including many business groups, and it had bipartisan support coming out of the Senate. Why weren't you able to do something that many thought was eminently sensible?
It's one of those issues where reasonable men and women of goodwill can disagree. And the House felt like to accept federal funds, even if it wasn't for Medicaid expansion, that it still was problematic. My response to that is about 35% of our budget here in Florida is made up of federal funds for roads, for schools, for lots of
military bases, our retirees who have Social Security and Medicare.
So the issue isn't federal funds, it's is this an appropriate use of federal funds? And I share their concern about the deficit, but I think that we're going to spend this money anyway providing health care. I would rather empower people. To me, you're treating people as a sovereign citizen when you give them an insurance card, but say you have responsibilities too. You have to pay your fair share.
Senator, you were willing to look at some $50 billion over the next many years to come in, but using it for people to buy private insurance. Do you think that's a model that can be resurrected? Are we looking at perhaps a special session being called? It's been floated, but I know people like you aren't necessarily thinking there's really any real chance of that happening in Florida.
The chances, the decision on a special session is up to the presiding officers and to the governor, but my sense as one state senator is
one powerful state senator,
it wouldn't be productive because the agreement, the ideological chasm is too broad.
What's the impact going to be for Floridians? The 1.1 million uninsured, that's fairly obvious.
Right.
The House had a much more watered down plan that really didn't go anywhere. And now you're looking at problems for those who are uninsured, and businesses are also complaining that they're going to feel the boomerang effect of this. Talk about the real impact we're now going to see.
Well, you just mentioned it, Michael. Number one, it's going to hurt businesses because they're going to bear the brunt of paying a lot of these extra costs for insurance that could be provided through health insurance. Secondly, hospitals, in an agreement with the federal government that the state wasn't a part of, had signed off on some aspects of the Affordable Care Act in anticipation of having more people with health insurance. Since that's not going to happen, it's really going to hurt our hospitals, particularly our safety net hospitals.
Talk again, go back to a point you made earlier. I think for the men and women watching this broadcast who say, listen, we take a lot of federal money, but we suddenly put a picket fence around this money. That smacks to a lot of people of pure politics that has nothing to do with pragmatism or helping the underinsured or uninsured or helping businesses that are going to face higher burdens. How do you come home and help explain that to a constituency? You obviously had pushed for a plan that didn't get through the House, but I'm sure you're getting this kind of question all the time now.
Well, we are, and the process that we have in the state of Florida is we have a House and a Senate. And I don't assign bad motives to people who disagree with me. I think that the House cares about that issue. They came at it from a different point of view, and ultimately we weren't able to bridge those differences. I think we'll just have to pick up next year and do the best we can to address this issue. Because, Michael, if you're a family of four and you make $22,000 a year, there's no way you can afford $12,000 to $15,000 a year for health insurance, but you can afford something. So let's make you responsible. You have your co-pays and deductibles, and you assist as you can. But I think the ultimate solution is to have everybody to have some form of insurance that they're participating in financially themselves.
Before we move on to the next topic about privacy and drones,
Yes.
legislation you sponsored, you say next year, will you put a similar bill on the floor?
I think we will. I think there'll be some discussions over the summer and fall, and hopefully this is something we can get done next year.
Let's talk about drones.
Yes.
Every time we did this topic on our air on WPTV, I'd get tons of Facebook responses. Talk about your legislation
Right.
that is now law that says law enforcement cannot use drones except in some extraordinary circumstances. Talk about what those circumstances are, why you felt this was so necessary.
Well, when I filed this, Michael, a lot of people thought that this was addressing some futuristic problem that was way around the corner. And because I have libertarian instincts and an awareness toward the power of government, people saw it in that light. However, once we got into the issue, people realized that literally we are on the verge of a wholesale explosion of drones, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector. And so before that technology got too far ahead of us, I said, let's have some common sense ground rules. The first ground rule is we don't want law enforcement as a routine method of surveillance to be monitoring the activities of law-abiding Floridians. So we prohibit that. We do say that if there's a terrorist attack or if you get a search warrant signed by a judge, so you've now shown probable cause of a crime, you can do it. And if there's an emergency, if there was an 11-year-old girl missing or there was a hostage situation, you wanted to send up a drone to look into a window. But the idea of having drones circling around large groups of people, monitoring their activities, it's just not consistent with the American experience. I'm really proud Virginia and Florida were the leaders and the first states to regulate this technology so that it doesn't adversely affect our privacy.
Senator, this affects law enforcement, but the explosion of technology, somebody privately could go out and get a small drone. How do we tackle that? We've got so many privacy issues we could discuss, but how do you begin to tackle those kind of issues?
Well, my goal this session was to address the issue of the government, because I think that's the most important. But I agree with you, as this technology continues, we are going to have some rules on how it can be used. Are you allowed to follow people to and from work? Can you set a drone over your neighbor's house and look at what they're doing? So I think that we'll have to come up with some ground rules for the non-governmental use, but I really thought it was important to say, here's what the government can and can't do.
In our remaining time, Senator, we talked about what many see as a failure on health care, expanding it to help 1.1 million Floridians. But let's talk from your perspective in the Florida Senate on what you saw as the big hits and other misses in this past session.
Well, the big hits to me are the environment. It was a banner year for the environment in Florida. I worked hard along with a number of our colleagues here in Palm Beach County and the Treasure Coast. We have $70 million in Everglades restoration funds. A lot of that will be used to keep polluted water that has too much phosphorus in it from getting into the Lake Worth Lagoon in the Indian River Lagoon. So it was a great year for the environment. I'm particularly pleased with the increase to public education. Our K through 12 system has $1 billion new additional dollars. Much of that is for the pay raise for our really high-performing teachers. So I think education and the environment did very well this session.
There's some who've argued in general that education has been whipsawed. 2 years ago, $1 billion cut, $1 billion added now. There was a lot of fights over tuition increase. Your take on all of that?
Well, I think that our education system is one of the most important parts of our community. And whether it's our children and students in high school, whether it's our community colleges, our state colleges, and our universities, in order for our state to really get to the next level, we have to build an infrastructure of a strong public school system and a strong university system. So I think we're on the way to doing that. And if you just look at the rankings of our universities, the number of applications, the acceptance rates, I think the story in Florida education is a positive.
Last question, Senator, your political future. A lot of people are already saying 2016 Senate President. Talk about that candidly.
Well, I'm hoping that we'll be able to achieve that goal. I've got a great team of senators that are working with me. It's not so much important about what I do or I accomplish, but it will give us an extraordinary opportunity to serve the Treasure Coast and to serve Palm Beach County. And so I look forward to the opportunity.
Senator Joe Negron from Stewart, our Republican representative in the Florida Senate. Thanks for taking a few minutes to join us on To The Point. We appreciate it. Best to you and yours. And we appreciate hearing your views as always. And coming up next, could a controversial former congressman become a lieutenant governor? The rumor mill runs again. Back in a moment. Now for our roundtable, George Bennett, political reporter with the Palm Beach Post, joining us, along with Brian Crowley of CrowleyPoliticalReport.com. Gentlemen, thank you for coming in. Senator Joe Negron, Republican from Stewart, his influence on the rise in Tallahassee, though frustrated on health care this session. Your take on him, where he stands, where he's going, and really mix that in with your thoughts about health care, because it's going to be an ongoing debate. First,
well, let me start with health care. I think that what the House did, what House Speaker Weatherford did by not accepting the Medicare proposal that came out of the Senate, I think was very harmful to Floridians, and I think it was short-sighted on his part. And for somebody who has statewide ambitions, I think he may pay a price for that in the future. I think Senator Negron is very well respected in the Senate. I think he is a conservative, but he's also a pragmatic. He tends to give people a chance to offer their point of view. He may ultimately do what he wants to do anyway, but I think he's very well respected up there, and I think he had a very good session for the people of Florida out of the Senate.
George?
Yeah, Negron's definitely a guy to watch in the future. I mean, he is, you never know with the leadership machinations, but he's definitely in line to become Senate. And if Republicans in Washington, Senate President, and if Republicans in Washington had their way, he'd be the guy running for Congress this time around. So, I mean,
do you think he would do that?
In District 18.
Right. Well, no, he's passed it up. I mean, but he's well thought of by Republicans going back to when he filled in for Mark Foley at the last minute, and so he's got a future.
Sometimes it takes a few weeks after the session's over to sort of step back and say what will be cemented as the big successes and or failures. We've talked healthcare. Your take on the session as it wrapped up, and you have a few weeks of perspective on benefits and the downsides for Floridians.
Well, I mean, I think the teachers overall should be happy that they are starting to get some positive attention out of Tallahassee. They've gone through a number of years of mostly negative attention. Teachers are not thrilled with everything that came out of Tallahassee, but they're getting a pay raise. As you know, I do some work for the Everglades. The Everglades are very happy with the $70 million they got for restoration out of this session. I think there's a lot of positive things that came out, but I think there's also a lot of things that happened, a lot of negative things that came out, the things they simply didn't do, and that gets back to the Medicaid issue again, which I think is really the number one failure of this legislature.
And going to be interesting, as you said, how it impacts thinking and voting in 2014, depending on what they do with it in 2014 in Tallahassee. George, any thoughts in terms of the session before we move on?
One thing to look at will be, how Rick Scott made the teacher raises and this tax break for manufacturers his big priority, and he got both those things, or at least most of what he wanted.
Right.
And I'll just be curious, to see if that teacher raise neutralizes teachers at all. I mean, they're not going to endorse him, the teachers union, but whether that buys him any goodwill in his re-election fight, I mean, I guess that remains to be seen.
Let's move on to a topic that got a little bit of play this week. Former Congressman Allen West, the governor said, would make a great pick to be his lieutenant governor. He was talking, I believe, to a West Coast radio station at the time, so we don't know if it was a one-off or not. There you see Allen West. Now, the last lieutenant governor, Jennifer Carroll, resigned in March over a scandal that's erupting about lobbying work she'd done for a group that has now been disenfranchised by the state for activities it was involved in that were called disingenuous, if outright illegal, as a matter of fact. She's not been personally charged. The Allen West comment, is it just a one-off comment because Allen West is a popular guy?
Well, first of all, Rick Scott would be a lunatic if he picked Allen West to be his running mate.
Now say what you think, Brian, because you're so sure.
Well, the last thing anybody that's running for re-election wants, that's at the top of the ticket, is somebody who is going to overpower
subservient
him.
to the number two on the ticket.
There would be no way they would be able to control what Allen West says or does, and there is no politically pragmatic reason for Rick Scott to pick Allen West. And we all know that Alan West is kind of shy and doesn't say what he thinks, but there's just no logical reason to pick Alan West.
Yeah, I mean, this was a radio station asked Rick Scott, what do you think about Alan West? And he said he's a great guy, he'd be a great lieutenant governor. It's not like he's floating Alan West's name out there. What I do think is interesting is, though, just
he let all of us do it.
Well, it would be fun. I mean, you would love it if he had Alan West.
Absolutely,
we would all love it if he was on the ticket.
It shows you the power of Alan West, because as soon as Rick Scott said that, the Florida Democratic Party put out a fundraising piece saying, let's stop Alan West from becoming lieutenant governor. I mean, he has that kind of power, pro and con, with people.
Of course, the biggest legacy of Jennifer Carroll may be that we have managed to go nearly, I think it's 60 days now without a lieutenant governor, and somehow the state is surviving.
Who would have thought that could happen? But we've learned.
We're muddling through. We'll move into the dog days of summer, but the fall will be here. 2014 cycles around quickly. Before we move on to a topic of the moment here in our community, kind of give me your mid to long-term view as we start looking to 2014, the big state races. As we look, we were talking off camera with the senator about District 18. He talked about his political fortunes. Kind of give me your early view of how you see some of this starting to shape up, because this is a time when a lot of people privately are really out there starting to make their name, build their machines.
You know, one interesting thing that happened that got little notice was that Adam Putnam filed for re-election.
Saw that.
And, a lot of folks had speculated whether or not Adam Putnam, who wants to be governor someday, might take a shot at it this time. He hasn't had a warm and fuzzy relationship with Rick Scott. I think the fact that Adam Putnam, the Commissioner of Agriculture, who's a Republican, decided not to get into that primary is indicative of what we're going to see with Rick Scott in 2014. I think he's going to have a fairly clear shot to winning his nomination. Sure, I don't think he's going to have a serious Republican opponent.
I don't think a Republican wants to tangle with him just money-wise and whatever.
And will Bill Nelson talk on the Democratic side for governor? Will that continue to pick up? Do your sources indicate there'll be any real traction there? I'm talking more than just discussions on radio stations about guys like Alan West. Beginning with you, Brian.
I was talking to somebody in his office just a couple of days ago, and who has consistently said to me that Bill Nelson is not going to run. But there was a little hedging this time. I don't know that it means anything, but I think Bill Nelson is at least giving it some thought.
I want to pivot to something here for you, because we've only got a few minutes left, and I know you've covered this. FAU President Mary Jane Saunders turning in her resignation this week, a tumultuous tenure with issues about controversial professors and remarks about naming rights, that a prison company bought to have naming rights to the stadium, since rescinded, people well aware of it. Your take on that for the university, where they are now, where they go forward?
Sure. I mean, it's been a perfect storm of controversies just in the last couple months there. I think what's remarkable if you study it from just a public relations crisis management point of view, is the President Saunders and the administration has managed to offend just about everybody. I mean, no matter what side you were on the stadium naming thing, she managed to, obviously she defended the stadium, taking this private prison contractor's money for the stadium name, but then some people thought she didn't do an effective job of defending it, and the contribution got yanked, so nobody was happy. And then with this step on Jesus thing, the university initially defended it, and then 2 days later they did a 180 and apologized for it and managed to offend the faculty, and so nobody again was happy with that. So I mean, in terms of just managing these controversies, almost everybody came away upset.
Temporary blow. When I talk to people, they think, listen, it's been tough, we've taken some black eyes, but it's a big and growing university, and it's something we'll get beyond, and now we have to aggressively go find new leadership. Is that the sense of how you think that plays out?
I got to tell you, I was talking to somebody about their professor who thinks the Boston Marathon might have been a hoax, and I was talking to somebody in Massachusetts about that theory, somebody who knew a victim, one of the injured people, and he said, what school is this guy from? And I said, FAU, and he was silent for a minute, and then he goes, is that the place that was going to name the stadium after the prison contractor? So I just thought it was interesting that, here's a guy in Massachusetts, his knowledge of FAU is, the prison name.
A lot of PR work to do, and a lot of work deeper than that as they'll begin to look for a new president. We'll be back, gentlemen, with more in just a moment, including the famous Crowley closer in a moment. Now, time for the Crowley closer.
Well, I was thinking about the IRS and all these other investigations that are going on, and then I realized in doing a little research that yesterday was the anniversary of the FBI ending its investigation of the song Louie, Louie. In 1964, they started an investigation of the famous Kingsman song because people thought that the song was pornographic. After running it at different speeds, bringing in audio experts, interviewing the people who wrote the song and others, they concluded that it was unintelligible at any speed. So Louie Louie remains unintelligible, not pornographic.
You burned midnight oil digging up that
2 years of
research.
investigation by the FBI on Louie Louie.
Brian, George Bennett, as always, gentlemen, thank you for being our guest on To The Point. Thank you, as always, for spending time on our broadcast with us. We'd like to ask you if you want to send a comment about today's broadcast, go to WPTV.com, click the political link. As always, we wish you and yours a great day and a great week.